SMEL approach, strategy, monitoring, evaluate.
Good morning, distinguished leaders, esteemed colleagues, and valued partners. Welcome to Executive Dialogue on Global Education Trends and Recommendations for Indonesia, hosted by Tanoto Foundation in collaboration with Filantropi Indonesia. We are delighted to gather with you this morning at the Tanoto Foundation Impact Gallery. My name is Francisca Wulandari, and I have the honor of guiding today's program. This session is designed as a focused, high-level conversation, bringing together leaders from foundations, civil society organizations, development partners, and universities to reflect on global education shift and what they mean for Indonesia. To formally open today's program, I would like to invite Ibu Inga Kusuma, Country Head of Tanoto Foundation Indonesia, to deliver the opening remarks. Ibu Inga, the floor is yours.
Good morning, distinguished guests, partners, friends, and colleagues joining us here today and also online. I would like to extend a very warm welcome again to our Tanoto Foundation Gallery here on the second floor. And thank you for taking your time out for being here for today's special event, the Executive Dialogue on Global Education Trends and Recommendations for Indonesia, a conversation on global education developments and what they mean for our country. A very warm welcome to Andreas Schleicher. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, the Director for Education and Skills at the OECD. We are honored to have you here for this high-level discussions on future of education, a topic that touches everyone, every family, and ultimately the trajectory of our nations. Today's sessions will be moderated by our own Murni Leo sitting here in the front. Murni is our head of MLE, Measurement, Learning and Environment Department for Tanoto Foundation Indonesia and Global Tanoto Foundations. I would like to extend a special thank you to Pak Iwan, Dr. Iwan Syahrial, a global education advisor and a steadfast champion of educational transformation in Indonesia. Thank you, Pak Iwan, for initiating this wonderful event and making this event possible today. Thank you. Today's event is co-hosted by the Indonesia Filantropi Association. We have Mbak Dian here in the front next to Andreas. We are truly grateful for the partnership and your shared commitment to strengthening Indonesia ecosystem, education ecosystem. So Andreas, I did a bit of Googling last night, and then needless to say, Andreas is one of the most influential voices in global education today. So if you do a quick Google review, the first things popping up on Google search is you are the architect of PISA assessment, or sometimes he's called the father of PISA assessment. So that alone speaks the volume, and it is truly privileged to have you this morning with all of us. Andrea's leadership in shaping PISA has profoundly changed how countries understand the learning outcome, how they benchmark internationally and design evidence-based policy, and track the impact of education reforms over time. For us here in Indonesia, especially today here, having Andreas is a rare and valuable opportunity. His insights into global trends and their implication for Indonesia will help us reflect on three things. The first one is how our system is preparing our young people for a very different future going ahead. Second, what capabilities matter most in the world reshaped by AI. And third is how countries can build supportive ecosystem around teachers, students, parents, and the community. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you have read the latest publication of PISA results. It shows a mixed picture. Indonesia rose in ranking, yet scores in reading, math, and science declined. So I was very pleased. I had a quick chat with Andreas. I was concerned about the stagnations of PISA trend, but you're saying it's a good thing. So we're going to have a deep dive. So it's a very encouraging comment from Andreas. With the reforms and collective efforts today underway in the past few years, today we have every reason to believe that Indonesia can change its trajectory. At Tanoto Foundation, our work has always been grounded in one belief. Quality education is the most powerful lever for social mobility. You've seen our program Pintar. It's not here, it's probably on the other side. Our leading program in basic education is a school improvement program that promotes quality education. We strive to generate innovations that improve students' proficiency in literacy and numeracy, such as active learning in teaching practices, school-based management for principal, parents' engagement in student learning, and a few more initiatives. We build evidence-based innovations to improve teaching and learning practices and extend technical assistance to the government for evidence-based policy shaping. Again, we believe in the power of evidence. We need to know what truly works. In our own work here in Indonesia, we put this theory to the test. From the impact evaluation study done in 2023 by Smary Institute, it shows a strong correlation between teacher training and student learning outcomes in our intervention school. The data was clear. Following 3 years of our Pintar program interventions in our intervention schools, the teachers' performance improved by 27%. And we saw a corresponding 39% improvement of student scores. This data reminds us of a simple truth. Human capital is never a matter of chance. It is a matter of investment. And today, our challenge is shifting from access to relevance. As the fourth biggest education system in the world, access is not an issue. Our net enrollment rate, especially in primary school and junior high school, is almost perfect. And the ratio of teacher to student is relatively high. So the problem today is the relevance of our education system. How do we prepare students for an AI-driven world when basic literacy and numeracy is still a problem? How do we ensure our demographic bonus does not become a demographic burden? So these questions open the door to more reflections that we need to have today. How do we equip Indonesia's young people not just to keep up, but to lead? How do we support our teachers to thrive when expectations rise? And how do we, across sectors, help build the ecosystem that our children deserve? So lastly, education in Indonesia, its challenge is too big for any single organization to solve alone. For a system change, we need to align our commitment, take collective actions, pool our resources behind solutions that already work, and bring evidence together so we can learn faster as a sector. That's why we are here today, to learn, reflect together, and think boldly together. By collaborating closely and engaging government as one of unified voice, together we can move PISA's score in Indonesia in the right directions. Once again, thank you all for being here, taking your time early this morning. And Andreas, we are eager to learn your view, opinions, and findings. Hopefully it set the stage for all of us to have a much needed conversations later today. So thank you all, wishing you a fruitful session. Thank you.
thoughtful opening remarks and for framing today's discussion with such clarity and purpose. To continue, we would like now to invite the representative of our collaboration partner, whose support has been essential in bringing today's session to life. So we are delighted to invite Ibu Dian A. Purbasari, Vice Chairperson of Filantropi Indonesia Executive Board, to deliver his remarks. Ibu Dian, the time is yours.
Good morning, distinguished guests. Bu Inge Kusuma, Country Head of Tanoto Foundation Indonesia. Mr. Andreas Schleicher, OECD Director for Education and Skills. Esteemed colleagues from philanthropy organizations, civil society, the education community, and all participants. Pak Iwan, long time no see, Pak. Good morning. On behalf of Perhimpunan Filantropi Indonesia, it is an honor to be part of today's Philanthropy Learning Forum. I would like to extend appreciation to Tanoto Foundation for hosting this important dialogue and for your long-standing commitment to improving education outcomes in Indonesia. As a national association that convenes and strengthens the philanthropy ecosystem in Indonesia, Perhimpunan Filantropi Indonesia views education as one of the most strategic areas where philanthropy can drive systemic change. Education is foundational to social mobility, inclusive development, and long-term national competitiveness, and yet the challenges remain significant. The latest PISA results underline gaps in basic literacy, numeracy, and science competencies that Indonesia must urgently address. These findings reflect persistent disparities in access, quality teacher readiness, and the ability of schools to adapt to digital transformation. For Perhimpunan Filantropi and our members, this reaffirms the need for philanthropy to play a catalytic role, not only through funding, but also through building partnerships, supporting innovation, and helping the government test scalable solutions. Today's dialogue is especially timely. Global trends such as AI integration, personalized learning, and data-driven decision-making are reshaping education systems around the world. As these shifts accelerate, Indonesia must ensure that our students and teachers are equipped with the skills, tools, and learning environments required for the future. Perhimpunan Filantropi Indonesia believes that knowledge exchange with global institutions like the OECD is vital. Access to comparative insights, evidence-based recommendations, and international benchmark help us as a collective philanthropy community to better understand what works and how we can support national education priorities more effectively. We are grateful for the opportunity to learn directly from Mr. Andreas Schleicher today. Looking ahead, Perhimpunan Filantropi Indonesia is committed to strengthening collaboration among philanthropic organizations, government, the private sectors, and academic institutions. No single actor, as mentioned by Ibu Inge previously, no single actor can address the complexities of education alone. But together, through aligned efforts, shared learning, and innovations that respond to real needs, we can contribute to a more equitable, high quality, and future-ready education system for all Indonesian learners. Thank you, and I look forward to the rich insights and discussions that will unfold today.
Thank you, Ibu Dian, for your insightful reflection and for underscoring the importance of multi-stakeholder collaboration in advancing education initiatives across Indonesia. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to the main segment of our program this morning. Before we begin, allow me to share a brief introduction of our distinguished speaker. Mr. Andreas Lecker is the Director for Education and Skills at the OECD and the founder of PISA, a global benchmark that has shaped education dialogue and policy worldwide. For more than 20 years, he has worked with ministers and education leaders around the world to strengthen the quality and equity of learning. In a recent interview earlier this year, he highlighted that automation and AI transform the world of today's work. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Andreas Laker, together with our moderator, Ibu Murni Leo, Head of Measurement, Learning, and Evaluation at Tanoto Foundation. The floor is yours, Mr. Andreas.
Thank you, Siska. Good morning, everybody. Very happy and delighted to be here. So, share a little bit as the head of the monitoring, learning, and evaluation here at Tanoto Foundation. It is my role to ensure that all our investment in education and health is evidence-based and impactful. And for that, Andreas and I share a passion for data and how we can use it to really inform policy and drive up change. So I've been following a lot of your work, Pak, for the past years, and I've been quoting a lot of your work in my work. So it's very honor for me to be able to moderate this session. So very happy to have you here in Jakarta. Would you like to say a few words to the audience before we start?
Yes, selamat pagi, and I want to tell you that it's a particular pleasure for me to be here with foundations. And the reason I say that is very simple. Everything significant that we have done at the OECD, we are a government organization, but everything significant that we have done is started with foundations. PISA is an example. You know, when the idea came up, you know, governments did not really see or understand its significance, but foundations did, and they supported its development. Most recently, that was many years ago, most recently we have done a survey of social and emotional skills in Indonesia, supported by foundations. So I think that's something, and that's true, I think, not just in Indonesia, but everywhere around the world. Governments have the capacity to manage education systems, but they rarely innovate. They rarely do that first mile effort. And I think that's where the work of foundations is so significant.
Thank you so much for the encouraging, because everyone here in the room are definite development practitioners, and of course, like coming from philanthropy, that's a very nice, encouraging word for us to really work together very collaboratively. So allow me to set the stage a little bit for our presentation and discussion today. So across many countries, including Indonesia, education systems is experiencing a lot of changes, right? So we see rapid technological changes, as highlighted by Ibu Dian earlier. We also see a lot of shift in the skills that's required, the competencies that's required for us to thrive currently and in the future. And we still in Indonesia have a lot of homework in terms of, you know, bringing access to the last miles and ensuring high quality education, which is what Iwan's passionate about. And of course, not to say, you know, ensuring that there's equitable and equity in all of that. So as today we gather today, let's take a time, as Inga mentioned, about like how we can reflect together on what is the trend in the global education and what it means for Indonesia moving forward. As we gather here today, so let's think about how we can build a learning systems that bring equal opportunity for all children, not only in the classroom, but also outside the classroom. So today we will begin with presentations by Andreas, and then it will be followed up by a question and answers from the audience. So if you have a questions, do note it down, and then I'll pass the mic to you. If you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I hope we can show my presentations. Yeah, and I want to start by, you know, something that we've all seen, how easily our education systems can be disrupted. You know, when you think back to the pandemic, suddenly many things that we took for granted no longer work, and the future will always surprise us. Now, climate change is going to disrupt our lives, our, you know, education systems a lot more than the pandemic. And artificial intelligence, you already mentioned, is questioning everything that we do. Now, there's no point in teaching young people answers when they are all stored. We need to, you know, make them not problem solvers, but problem finders. Now, that's a very, very different kind of challenge. And then you can add many more disruptors into this picture. Now, nobody here in this room knows what the future will bring. We don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow, but we can understand the drivers that shape this future and then build scenarios of this future. And the more agile we become in imagining different versions of the future, the more better we will be prepared for the future that eventually arrives. One thing is very clear: if you look around yourself, you know, global conflict is on the rise within and across countries. There is growing polarization, tensions in the world. And it relates squarely back to education. Educational polarization is going to polarize our labor markets, our economies, our societies, our political systems. And we see that every day, and ultimately raising in conflict. We see democratic engagement is declining in most regions of the world. People are less willing to engage themselves in democratic process by voter turnout, for example. On a positive side, young people are much more willing and much better in changing jobs than older generations. And that's a good thing. You know, it shows us that, you know, there's a future that could be different for people. But it also means that as an education system today, it's no longer a good idea to prepare someone for one single future. We need to prepare young people for jobs that have not been created, to solve problems we cannot even imagine, to use technologies that have not been invented. And you can see it's becoming a very real thing. People deploy their skills in very different contexts. Now you can see the energy transition. I think it's a really encouraging chart because it tells us that despite what people say about, you know, climate transitions, people are voting with their feet. Now we now have more people employed in the green energy sector than in the brown energy sector. But it also means that people need to have that capacity to use their skills in novel contexts. Traditionally, we have not been very good in this in education. You can think back to the pandemic. You know, suddenly we had, you know, an abundance of unemployed people from the, you know, hoteleries and restaurants because they were closed. And we had a massive shortage of exactly the same skills in the health industry. Same skill sets, very different context. And we couldn't move people from one to the next because we didn't know how to recognize those kinds of skills. We need to become a lot better in deploying the skills of people. And then there's technology, you know, the kinds of things that are easy to teach, test, are losing in relevance. Technology intensive tasks are on the rise. You put the two things together, the future of work is going to be very, very different. That's the reality around us. And then when you look at outcomes, you know, you said rightly that Indonesia's performance has been quite flat in the PISA context. But, you know, it's a very different student population that you have today. You know, when I came first to Indonesia, it was in 1995. You know. It was essentially the children of wealthy parents who went to school. You know. And it's easy to educate them to a decent level of education. Today, everybody is in school. And of course, it's a much different challenge. And Indonesia has actually been one of the few countries that were able to maintain quality standards in changing conditions. That's, you know, quite a big success. You don't see that in, you know, many of the neighboring countries. You go to Thailand, to Philippines, and so on. They have depreciated outcomes when they expanded the system. So it's not so bad, but the reality is, you can see here, there is more than half of young people who go to school in Indonesia who do not master the foundation skills. And with foundations, I mean, you know, can you navigate ambiguity? Can you distinguish fact from opinion? You know, in the world of AI, that's a survival skill. And you can see many, many people struggle with this. Of course, there are some strong performers, that's also true, but imagine you could move all of the children in the red part into the green part. And you may say, oh, that's impossible. There are lots of them. But, you know, Korea has been able to do that. Vietnam is actually close to achieving that. Singapore certainly did that over the last generation. So it's not an impossible goal. It's something that can be achieved. You know, you can ask yourself, you know, what would Indonesia gain from that? And the answer is, you are talking about 8 times the size of your current economy. That's the value of ensuring that every young person has a chance to succeed, has achieved the foundation skills. You cannot imagine any kind of spending on education that is actually, you know, significant compared with the gains. The rewards to the Indonesian economy are so much greater than any possible spending to achieve improvement. So that's why this agenda is so important for the future of the country. Now, $20 trillion. Now, you can think about all of this as a race between education and technology. You know, before the first industrial revolution, neither education nor technology made a big difference for the majority of people. You know, we were quite self-sufficient in our fields. And then came the Industrial Revolution, moving technology ahead of people. And it created huge amount of social pain. People were not ready for this. Well, then we built schools, trying to make people compatible with the norms of the industrial economy, and it created generations of prosperity. Our wealth is built on that success, the traditional schooling system. But, you know, today we have the AI revolution, and you can see once again, technology is moving ahead of the capabilities of people. The kind of things that are easy to teach become easy to digitize. You have many young Indonesians completing university, having difficulties finding a good job, and at the same time, employers say they cannot find the people with the skills we need. But that is, you know, the same dilemma, the kind of social pain that we see. And the question is, you know, how we move this forward again, you know, towards a very different type of education system. But it's at the beginning of that big transformation, but it is as important as the transformation after the first industrial revolution. If you ask yourself, you know, so what should we expect from education tomorrow? I guess, you know, we will have more opinions than people here in this room on that. But I think one thing probably we can all agree, you know, education should help young people figure out why they are here on this planet, what is important to them. If we only achieve that, you know, that people understand, you know, meaning and purpose, you already have achieved really a lot in education. Education should help people, you know, understand where they can become really good at. And that's far from trivial. You do not achieve this just by giving young people more choices, a broader curriculum. It's very much about the kind of people who are teachers who are not just good instructors, but also good coaches, good mentors, great facilitators, good social workers, creative designers of innovative learning environments. And that's what matters to help people understand and discover their talents. And then, you know, following your passion never makes you happy in life. There's a lot of research that shows us that actually what makes us happy is to make a difference to other people. So helping people understand, you know, what does the world need from you? What does it expect from you? Very, very important. And then, you know, translate your skills into better jobs and better lives. So if that's the goal, you can see that this story is about more than academic achievement. And I want to come back to this, you know, when you ask yourself, you know, how do we, on the one hand, you know, create a more sustainable world? That's very important. Reconcile the present with the future better than we have done in the past, but also enable young people to live in a world that is out of balance, to develop that resilience. And I want to come back to this. If you look, you know, who's doing best on academic performance? Singapore. Not just in the OECD, but in all countries for which we have data. They got 10 out of 10 points in academic performance. But as you saw before, that's only part of the story. If you actually look a little bit below the surface, you can see, for example, Singaporean 15-year-olds have on PISA more limited psychological strengths. They show quite limited emotional resilience, you know. And again, that's not a byproduct of education. That is the core of education. Can you reimagine, reinvent yourself when the context is different? You can see the quality of social relationships is not so strong. Singaporean students have a hard time to build a life beyond school. So when you look at a broader range of outcomes that are relevant in today's world, you can see even systems that are very successful on traditional metrics have a long way to go to prepare kids for the next century, for this century. If you look at Indonesia, you can see the yellow bar is quite short still. Only 2 out of 10 points in academic skills. There's a long way to go to build stronger academic foundations. Too many students are just taught to absorb content, but not how to use it. That's the reality. At the same time, you can see young people in Indonesia are confident. They have that sense of self-efficacy, that psychological strength. And in this volatile world, that is incredible asset. You can see they show a good level of agency. They can mobilize their cognitive, social, emotional resources, solve problems, do things. Very important today. Emotional resilience, the light green bar. Also an important asset today. You can see many of those outcomes are really important in the 21st century. And as you expand academic success, do not lose the qualities that are actually very, very important for the world of tomorrow. So a mixed picture. And now when you compare Indonesia and Singapore, you might be tempted to conclude, maybe we have to make a choice. Either we educate children very well academically, and then we put a lot of pressure on them and they aren't happy, or we focus on their well-being and then we compromise academic success. But you can see, Denmark is an example. They get almost everything right. So you can see you can reconcile the cognitive, social, and emotional outcomes. And that's really what 21st century education needs to be about. It's not to achieve academic success at the expense of social emotional outcomes, but through social emotional outcomes. And that's what really good education should be looking like. This is also worrying. We looked at creativity among 10 and 15-year-olds, and we could see in almost all jurisdictions for which we have data. For Indonesia, we only have data for one region, which is Kudus. But you can see 15-year-olds report lower levels of creativity than 10-year-olds. If I would tell you your 15-year-olds do worse in mathematics than your 10-year-olds, you would say, well, maybe then there's something going wrong in schooling. If we lose mathematics skills, the longer students stay in school. But for creativity, we rarely ask the question. We somehow, don't even look at it normally. It's not part of the exam system. It's not part of the curriculum explicitly. But it's a big concern. And now you ask yourself, okay, if creativity is important in this century, is it really hard to teach, really hard to develop? And many people say yes. Many people say, oh, you have to have an amazing kind of teacher, or you need to focus just on the arts and so on. And I think that's deceptive, because that means it's always going to be an elite that achieves creativity. Can we develop creative skills in the same way as we develop reading and mathematics? And the answer is yes, and I show you how. The first thing is very simple. The first thing is about mindsets among teachers, mindsets among students. You can see, for example, that the growth mindset that young people develop on the horizontal axis is almost one-to-one linked to the creative thinking skills in the student population. Where students believe, I can grow beyond my limits. My teacher will, never give up to believe in me. You can see those students, education systems also have very creative students, where teachers believe that success is about the intelligence. And it's true in large parts of Indonesia, according to PISA, that teachers do not believe that every student can learn. You can see the price for this is that students do not end up as creative as you want them to be. There are some exceptions across countries, okay, but overall, the self-related beliefs that we create among young people are hugely influential. Some people say that your own beliefs about how you can overcome difficulty is the most powerful predictor, more powerful than motivation. Seeing failure as an opportunity for growth. And you can see at least according to the PISA data, it works like this. And it's not difficult to develop. There are interventions, which in 10, 12 hours, you can change those student beliefs. It's not very difficult to do. It rarely happens, but, one powerful way. Second point I want to make is, the attitudes we develop. You can see, for example, where students are, have more room to do things, to engage in projects, experiments. And I mean, a lot of things have happened in the last few years in Indonesia in this direction, creating more innovative learning environments. And you can see, giving teachers greater discretion to design, learning environments. And you can see that's fostering creativity, openness to new ideas, art and experience, sense of self-efficacy. You look at that list, it's not very hard to do. It's actually much easier than to teach people calculus and trigonometry. It's not very difficult to do. And then finally, social and emotional characteristics. You can see, where we foster perspective taking. Can students appreciate different ways of thinking? Can they see the world through different lenses, appreciate, different ways of working, different openness to cultures? Very powerful predictor for creative thinking. It's, by the way, the secret why girls in Indonesia are doing better than boys in creative thinking. They are better on that kind of perspective taking. Curiosity, persistence. Innovation is not just about you having a great idea, but about you being able to sort of continue to invest in this intellectually, not to give up when there are difficulties, stress resistance, assertiveness, social skills, emotional control. Again, the list is not, rocket science. It's actually something that every teacher can do and most teachers want to do. If you survey teachers in Indonesia through the PISA assessment, why did you become a teacher? Most teachers say, I became a teacher because I want to make a difference to the lives of young people. They don't even say, I want to teach them history or mathematics. They want to make a difference to the lives of people. That's the motivation. These are the tools. We should just give teachers a bit more space to use those tools. And you can see the powerful influence on outcomes. Now I come finally to the digital story. And this is a double-edged sword, We see how powerful digital technologies are to transform learning. They can make learning fun. They can, make learning more personal, all of that. But when you look at exposure of technology, by teachers, you can see it is not so convincing. You can see a little bit of use of technology, up to 1 or 2 hours. You can see that's an advantage, when teachers draw on technology. But, when teachers use more than 3 or 4 hours of technology for instruction, you can see sort of the lines go backwards. So technology intensity is not so clearly related to education success, not as clearly as we would want to see it. When, students use technology on the weekend, for learning, it can add to this, it's an advantage. And there are many really good tools coming out now to help students use technology. What about digital leisure? Students using their own smartphones, social media, and so on. And this story is not good. You can see it only goes backwards against creative thinking. The more students use social media, technology in school, the worse they perform on the PISA assessment of creative thinking. So structured use of technology by teachers can work up to a point, but the incidental use of technology for leisure is not such a great idea. And that's something that we need to take to heart. Technology can, improve personalized learning, but it can also make learning more shallow, more scripted, more passive. And the reality is most Indonesian students use technology for consumptive purpose, not for creative purpose. And that works against you. And even, even when you do that on weekends, it's not so much different to picture. So double-edged sword, why do I say this? Because when you think about the time students spend on digital devices in school, Indonesia is among the top countries. You could see when it comes to the skills of using technology, Indonesia ranks quite low. When it comes to the exposure of technology, Indonesia ranks quite high, and that's not a good mix. Humans have always been better to invent new tools than to use them wisely. And there's a great risk, that students do not have the foundation skills. So when you talk about digital literacy or AI literacy, think much more about, can you make ethical decisions? Can you distinguish fact from opinion? Can you navigate ambiguity? Manage unstructured problems. Those are the true AI literacy skills, not about, working with your smartphone. And you can see there's a gap in this case. And you can see actually, I'm going to skip that. Here's an example of this, and this is going to be my final set of slides. From Turkey, where students use ChatGPT to write essays. And what you can see is when they use ChatGPT, they produce better essays. That's a great thing. But when afterwards we tested their writing skills, their thinking skills, everything, they perform worse. So task performance doesn't need to lead to automatically to improved learning. In this case, you could see it worked against the students. Here's similar, China has done a lot of research on that, and we call it metacognitive laziness. You outsource your thinking and you lose your understanding. Very, very real, very clear in the data. Here's a study from the United States. They used a large language model to help students, write something. And then the next day, they asked the students, tell us the three main arguments of what you have written. And 80% couldn't remember what they had written. So again, they had outsourced their kind of thinking skills. And that's really, we need to get that balance right. We need to strengthen the human capabilities and make people great users of AI so that AI will augment this. Where technology and AI make a huge difference or can make is for teachers. When teachers used technology to tutor students now, you could see at the right side, for high-performing teachers, experienced teachers, technology did not add any value. No? They did as well with technology as without technology as tutors for students. No? They're very experienced. But when less experienced teachers used those kinds of devices, suddenly they became good teachers. They got much better results. No? So you can see technology can augment the skills of less experienced teachers. And we know why, because in this case, the technology helps teachers to use more effective strategies, to prompt students to explain what they had done, to ask them questions, to guide their thinking, to affirm students' attempt, and they did less frequently what bad teachers do, not just give away the answer, or you give students generic solution strategy, or just encourage them in a generic way. So you could suddenly see technology can lead to transformation if in the hands of experienced people like teachers, and they will become better teachers. So technology is not a magic power. AI is more like an amazing amplifier, an incredible accelerator. It's going to amplify good educational practice in the same way it can amplify poor practice. It can foster equity. Students with special needs have a completely different world for them now than they used to have in the past. If you have dyslexia and you sit in a classroom, you're not going to follow very much of what's going on because you can't read. With AI, you can overcome that gap and actually participate like every other student. So technology can make learning far more inclusive, but we also see how it has amplified inequality in the pandemic. Technology can help you to make learning more granular, more personal, accelerate your learning, but you have seen it can also lead you to outsource your thinking, to become a consumer of information rather than an agent to interact with this. Technology can super empower teachers. They can become really creative designers of more innovative learning environments, or it can make them slaves of scripted lesson plans. And again, as humans, it's easy for us to trade our autonomy against convenience. When we found Google Maps, we lost our sense of orientation. It made our life easier, but also shallower. And I think that's something that we see a lot in teaching. Creative lesson planning design, AI is amazing in that. but it can also lead teachers not to engage. I work a lot in the field of assessment, and AI has huge potential to transform assessment. It can make assessment completely different these days. Look at social emotional skills that we couldn't capture in the past. But the risk is that teachers say, oh, fine, I just give AI the task to assess my students, and I lose that connection to the students. I lose the understanding of who that student is and who they want to become. So I think that's something really, really important. And we see very clearly from PISA that the quality of student-teacher relationship is an incredibly powerful, amplifier of this. AI is ethically neutral, but it's always in the hands of people who are not neutral, and that's really something that we need to take to heart. I will stop here so that we have enough time for our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very insightful and also thought-provoking. So I have a few notes over here, even from myself, right? So one is education has not been agile. I think the question will be like, how do we catch up with the changes? How can we speed up and accelerate the efforts? And then you also talk very interestingly about like there's no one single competencies that we need to cultivate, but we need to kind of like do it multiple. But also I think the question is like, how can Indonesia tap on the strength that the students already have, like resilience, psychological well-being, and use it to kind of like accelerate the academic performance. And you talk a little bit about there's so much hard work that needs to be done, right? 8 times potential, but also means like 8 times more hard work that we need to do in order to achieve and catch up with other countries. I like how you share about like there's still a lot of evidence that we can learn about the use of technology, about how and when to use technology well, being productive about using technology, not only consumptive. So a lot of thoughts that's ongoing just based on those 20 minutes presentations alone. So probably I can invite some questions from the audience. I'm sure all of you also have a lot of questions. So if you would like to raise your hands and feel free to raise your hands. We have our team here that can pass the mic to you. So just mention your name, organizations, and please keep the question as brief as possible.
Sure. Thank you. Hi, I'm Rama from AVPN. We are funders and social investor network based in Singapore. So education has been very personal interest to me because I'm soon to be that. So, this fact is somehow worrying in a way. So yeah, trying to understand you asked to, share a roadmap for Indonesia, how then in the 10 or 15 years we could do better, in these different elements. What would you be suggestions from you, Pa Andreas, in terms of, trying to, different stakeholders in Indonesia, governments, privates, philanthropy can do their own role, respective roles to really do better in the systems, because we can all agree that this is a very systemic challenge. So if you ask now to give a roadmap for Indonesia in 10 or 15 years, how it could be. Thanks.
I'm not the most qualified person to do that. I do not know your country as well as many others. But personally, I think actually that Indonesia is on a quite good track. When I look at the last years, giving teachers a greater sense of purpose, greater flexibility, more room to actually design their environments. Now you need to bring experience, expertise, decision-making closer to the student. And I think that's happened in the case of Indonesia. Enhancing kind of formative assessment, becoming better to understand how students learn differently, and giving teachers better analytics, better insights on that. I think those are really very important steps that in the long run will enhance the quality of learning. So I think there are many things that I believe are important. When other things where more could be done certainly is, and the first may be a paradox, but I think, success in education is about often teaching fewer things at greater depths. The learning environment in Indonesia is still very crowded. You know, students are very good at the first layer of the problem, but they're not actually, have not, you know, this kind of struggle of learning that is so important. Is you see too little in the classroom, at least according to the PISA results. I think that's one of the things. The challenge of equity. How do you attract the most challenging, talented teachers to the most challenging classrooms? How do you make it intellectually attractive for teachers to take on, you know, difficult situations? Now, I think Vietnam would be a great example of a country that has done that at scale and very, very successfully. I think that's still ahead of Indonesia to better align resources with needs. I mean, Indonesia puts actually quite a lot of resources into education, I mean, compared with its budget. And I think to better target those kinds of resources and align them. But, you know, overall, I do think, you know, the last years have put, I mean, technology also has made a real difference in Indonesia. I think you can see that everyone, not just in education, you know, when you enter the country, passport control, I wish we had something like this in France. So I think there are many good signs. I think empowerment is important. Ultimately, the people who can change the system are the people who are in the classroom, the leaders in the school, the leaders in the system. And I think to build that capacity, I think it's a long road, but I do think 10 and 15 years is a good time to achieve those results. You know, it's about running fast and getting faster.
Just going to add a little bit on that. I think the Ministry of Education has been trying to reduce the load of the students in the past decades, right? And but I think adding on to that, do you believe that there's a single magic bullet? You said technology is not. Is there a single magic bullet that we can just apply in order to accelerate, you know, the skills for our students?
You know, I'm not sure there's a single magic bullet, but what you can do is you can ask yourself, you know, what have been the drivers that made different education systems advance fast? And then how you can configure those drivers in your own context. You know, I think, you know, I started out with growth mindset, you know, getting teachers a different understanding that every child can learn and progress. And it's my role to discover, you know, how that child learns, who that child is, who they want to become. I think those are very powerful levers. You know, the single magic bullet that I would, you know, always focus is the educator. That is where learning ultimately happens, and what we can do to strengthen that role of the educator. One of the worrying trends, I mean, I highlighted many positive trends in Indonesia. One of the worrying trends is the growing, you know, what I call commodification of education. You know, you have, in the past, education in Indonesia was a kind of whole of society enterprise. Everybody was part of that. Nowadays, you have this attitude that students are consumers of learning and teachers are some kind of service provider and the parents are some kind of client. And that creates a very unhealthy distance between the different actors. Now, I think bringing that back together, I think is going to be really important.
The spirit of collaborations, pretty much. So I'll take another questions from the audience. Okay, so Patrick can help with passing the mic. Hi, Ibu, how are you?
Thank you, Andreas. My name is Lina. I'm from JPA. Thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. So I have like two questions. The first one is like you said that there is like no magic bullet for the things like for the education. But I would like to think like we are as part of the organization here, grassroots, like policymaker. Is there any recommendation that you can give us? Like what can we do like for the short term or for the medium term, like to actually help us to improve our education systems? That's the first one. The second one that I would like to know is actually, so like education is like 12 years, right? Even like started like from the early childhood development things. Like from based on your experience, is there any certain level that we should focus on? Maybe like we should focus on the primary or like for secondary. And then if we already like have like the students is already like have the learning loss like in the primary, and then do you have like any suggestion like from your experience how they catch up like for the secondary or like for the higher education, so then they can actually, as you mentioned, like there is like the education teach a lot of things, but then also like the company actually cannot get the skills that they would like to do. Like any suggestion on that? Thank you.
Yeah, first on the role of foundation, I really believe that the game changers are often civil society organizations in education, and I think that's the true power. I don't think foundations use their resources well if they help the government do what the government should be doing, like building schools and repairing schools and so on. It's very nice if they do it, but that's just displacing. Where I think foundations make the real difference is to plant the seeds for new ideas. Again, I can talk about my own work. Every seed has been planted with the help of foundations. And then, when the tree grows, governments say, oh, how interesting, we will do it. And I do think we lack those kinds of innovative forces in education. Education is a very conservative social enterprise. And we as parents are a big part of the problem. We like our children to learn exactly how we were learning, 30 years ago. And we get very nervous when our children learn things we no longer understand. And teachers are more likely to teach how they were taught and how they know they should be teaching. And as a government minister, you can lose an election when something goes wrong, but you're not going to win an election because it takes a lot of time to translate good ideas into better outcomes. So there's a very, resistance for change throughout the system because the benefits are far and the costs are near. So that's where foundations can make a difference. So becoming the kind of innovators, game changers. And you don't need much resources for this, actually. I don't think it's a matter of volume. It's a matter of ideas, really. That's so important. About the levels of education, our experience is that the biggest difference you make in the earliest years of children. And why do I say this? Because many of the skills that I showed you here that are so transformational in the 21st century are best developed in the earliest years of life. For a 3-year-old, empathy is a skill. For a 30-year-old, empathy is a personality trait. You don't change that. Curiosity, the same thing. So I think the more but it means also that early childhood education needs to evolve from access to quality, from care to education, to really see this as part of the learning trajectory. We still have a very compartmentalized way of looking at education. We send people to kindergarten, which is about play. Then from one day to the next, they come into school and they have to figure out how to sit behind a desk. And then in secondary school, we teach the subject. Then in university, that's not a good idea. That we need to make, look at this as a lifelong trajectory. And I think that's really, but if you ask me, where would I invest first? Clearly in the earliest years of life. And we often have a difficult, some governments try to make university free and let children pay tuition for kindergarten. That's not a very good idea.
Thank you so much. That definitely resonates to the work that we do at the foundation, where we try to also promote investment in the early years. As early as possible, start early. That's what we always say at the foundations. And maybe one more questions? Oh, okay, here at the back. So, hi, Ibu. I think it's not on.
Okay. My name is Jasmine, and I'm from EdTech Hub. It's really, really interesting hearing all the insights that you've shared, especially on technology being a possible driver, but also a lot of risks associated with the use of technology, especially in education. I think thinking about assessments and measurements, and as I guess the government is also looking to, maybe use more technologies and AI in the education space, what do you think is the most important things maybe to measure when it comes to using technology for education, both for teachers or for students, to drive learning with all the risks associated? Thanks.
A very, very important question. I'm not sure we have seen yet convincing evidence on technology making a difference for student learning. That's a harder part to do. And but I do also think that we should measure a wider range of outcomes there. I do believe that technology has the greatest power on skills that are non-traditional. why would you listen to a teacher explain you the result of a scientific experiment when you can do that in a virtual laboratory? That's where you can do an experiment rather than just listen to the results. So I think technology can actually enhance learning where we really need it, making learning more interactive, more kind of so on. But, you know, honestly, evidence on that is not so convincing. Where I do think we have much more hope is in the technology in the hands of teachers. I give you an example, and probably, you know, teachers in Indonesia will not, you know, be very, you know, taken aback when you hear it. But I was recently in a classroom in Shanghai where they used AI-based classroom observation. So they put 4 cameras into the classroom, and at the end of the lesson, the teacher could get a really good readout of the quality of the interactions with students. You know, who did I pay attention to? Did I talk too much or too little? Were the students interested or bored, or, you know, did they advance or get stuck? And, you know, after 1,000 training lessons, the system became better than the National Inspectorate. Really, really interesting. And then I asked a teacher afterwards, you know, are you not worried? You have Big Brother in your classroom now to see what you're doing. And she said something really interesting to me. She said, you know, in the past, I had my school principal coming into my classroom. And I was really nervous because my school principal was always judging me. And, you know, then afterwards making bad comments about me. And therefore, you know, I always played a game. When the principal came, I did a completely different lessons just to have everything wonderful. So no utility. Now I am who I want to be. And I learn from my own behavior. I improve every day. I get this kind of systematic daily feedback. So I think helping teachers to become better teachers, giving teachers to understand student learning needs. I think there's a lot of potential there that we are just beginning to harvest. That's where I would start. You know, if I were a government, you know, putting, you know, a laptop into everybody's hand, I'm not sure it's going to get you very far. But I think creating tools that help teachers to connect, to collaborate, to build a greater community, to share their practice, to see their practice, to engage in, you know, assessment. And you mentioned assessment. I mean, that's something I work with very closely. That's where I actually think there is huge power. You know, I would say that the greatest mistake that we made in the history of education was to divorce learning and assessment. If you go back far enough in history, we all learned through apprenticeship. We all learned from and with people. There were no teachers. The teachers were everybody around you. And, you know, when you made a mistake, someone would tap you on your shoulder and say, hey, you did that wrong. You know, here's a way to do it better. So learning and assessment were always integrated. They're always real time. And then when we started industrial schooling, we separated them. We ask you, you know, oh yeah, now you pile up learning for 12 years. And then one day I call you back and say, tell me everything that you learned in your life in a very short time, in a very compressed setting. And everybody gets very anxious about it. And that's something that made learning shallow, that made learning superficial. And now with AI, we can bring the two together again. You know, learning and assessment can once again become intertwined. And I think that's where AI will make a huge difference now.
There's additional question, the follow-up questions from our audience who is watching from YouTube. So in regards to that, right, do you have any solid evidence about like the impact of AI in promoting foundational literacy and numeracy?
Yeah, as I said before, you know, the results are very mixed. We can see a little bit of that enhancing learning, but when there is a strong digital intensity in classrooms, learning outcomes tend to be worse. We do not fully understand what's cause and effect. It could also be that lower performing students, you know, resort more to AI and so on. But I don't think we have convincing evidence that AI is the best tool for students to learn.
I guess there's so much to research on, like in terms of the use of technology and learning. So I think we kind of like come to the end. I would like to spend more time with you. I'm sure everyone would like to spend more time with you, but I think we've come to the end of the sessions. So any final reflection that would like to share with us in the room?
No, you know, I must say, actually, I see Indonesia on a quite positive trajectory. Now, over the past, it's been able to expand access. I call this the first education revolution in Indonesia, putting more children into classrooms and maintaining quality standards. I think Indonesia was successful with this. Now it's in the middle of the second educational revolution, which is about relevance and quality. And I think we talked a lot about quality. Maybe we didn't talk enough about relevance. We have about almost half of the 15-year-olds in Indonesia. When we ask them about relevance of learning, they say that school was a waste of time. And I think that is something, if young people do not relate what they do in school to the purpose, the meaning of their life, if they can't see their future, you have more than half of Indonesian 15-year-olds who have no idea what they want to do in their future, or who want to have jobs that do not exist, like becoming an influencer or a YouTuber. That's not a good thing. If school doesn't connect you to the real world and bridge that, access, those are, I think, some things that in this second revolution, I mean, a lot has happened on the ground. I think the empowerment of teachers, the greater discretion that schools have, all of that is really very, very important foundation, but making learning more relevant, more engaging, and teach fewer things at greater depth, that's still, I think, ahead of the country.
Wow, thank you very much for your sharing today. So I guess it's very inspiring, but at the same time, a lot of homework for us in the room, as well as online, in order to improve the education in Indonesia. So there's a request from the audience. Will we be able to get the access to your slides? There's very interesting data that we would like to explore deeper during the weekend. So thank you very much, Andreas. I'm going to return it back to the MC.
Okay, thank you, Andres and Murni. Mr. Andres, we will now like to give you token of appreciation for your very inspiring session. Ibu Inge, we would like to invite you, the country head of Tanoto Foundation Indonesia, to come on stage to present the token to Mr. Andreas, please. Thank you. Now we would like to do a group photo. So if you can please move to the front of the stage. We come from here. And everyone please stand up and please remain at your seat as the photographer will help us to take a photo from here. Okay, if I can also join. Okay. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Cheese. All right, thank you. Oh, one more. Okay. Okay, video. Oh, 1, 2, 3, please. Waving hands. Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're still in the event. Ladies and gentlemen, as we conclude today's executive dialogue, we would like to inform all participants that Tanoto Foundation has prepared a complimentary copy of our newly released publication, The Evidence Behind Better Philanthropy. The book offers valuable insights into monitoring, evaluation, and learning practices used by leading global foundations. You are welcome to pick up a copy at the registration counter as you exit the room. On behalf of Tanoto Foundation and Filantropi Indonesia, we appreciate your time and contributions. Wishing you a productive day ahead and looking forward to seeing you at the future sessions. Thank you and bye-bye. Thank you, everyone. you're doing a networking, we are also preparing you snacks and coffee and tea. Please enjoy the snacks and the tea over there. Thank you, everyone. Also, don't forget to do Harbolnas, the twin date.